Hey, People's Conspiracy Oz, I'm Mick Raven, and in the dark corner is not Mr. Krause, but is the General Lee Maddox.
Hello, good afternoon.
And Scott Bartle.
Hi, how's it going?
Boy, has he got a can of worms to open, people. Give us contact on +60 1028 006 1918. Download the podcast from iTunes. Go to www.conspiracyoz.com and get with the program. On this fine, well, the sun's out now, guys. I don't know about you guys, but it's starting to shine here. Had a bit of rain. What's Perth like over there, Scott?
Oh, beautiful. It's spectacular.
Why do I hear that all the time? I talk to someone from Perth. Do you actually have any clouds at all? It's brilliant.
Occasionally.
Yeah, they probably get the chemtrails. Yeah.
Oh, boy, yeah, we've seen a few of those. Anyway, it's Sunday, 7th of April, 2013. Let's get on with it. I just watched the video again, Scott, for the second time. I still shake my head. I don't understand what's going on because this is just a huge can of worms.
Yeah, this just blows me away. And thanks very much for joining us today, Scott. Much appreciate you coming on. So yeah, Scott's from he's got his own website called truth-now.net, is that right?
That's the one, yeah.
And he's had a documentary called What the FUQ, the Unanswered Questions of the Australian Government. And Mick's watched it. I've watched it about 4 times now, and it blows me away every time I watch it. It's just incredible. Would you mind, what do you reckon, Mick, just get Scott to talk us through the doco a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone needs to go to that video and check it out straight away. We'll put the link up. We've actually got the story up on our front page, but that is very self-explanatory. If you watch it, anyone like watching it will totally understand that there are 2 separate entities set up. One is legitimate, one is not. That's a very interesting argument. He's had no response, and I just explained in simple terms, Scott, to people I know that when there's no reply to a question, then it's left without an answer. It's the same thing as, like, this is on a simple level, but I explained to people that when I was a member of Greenpeace years ago, they used to do a thing called the True Food Guide, where they would ask a company, a corporation, do you have genetically modified organisms in your food? If they replied and said, no, we don't, they would get the green thumb. If they made no reply at all, they would get a red thumb because you couldn't answer the question. You see what I mean? It's exactly the same thing Scott's doing. He's asking a question and they will not provide the answer, and that's, oh boy.
met with silence, isn't it right?
Oh boy, it's an amazing situation because it just puts everything under the microscope from a simple customs thing. Yeah.
So take us through, Scott, how it all started for you.
Okay. Well, a first one, perhaps to expand on that silence as acceptance. You imagine sitting at a barbecue with drinking a beer and a small kid is drowning in the pool beside you, and you sit there and do absolutely nothing. I don't think there'd be a person on the planet who'd say you're consenting to the action of the inevitable of that child drowning. It's that silence.
Yeah, well, that's what they say about the silence with everything. It's like you can even take it back to something like World War II, where a lot of the people knew what was going on when the Nazis were in power, and they just didn't do anything, and that's why it escalated. It's because it wasn't stopped in the beginning, and it became a monster in the end. And this is the same thing what's happening here with the Australian government. Yeah, I can totally see and how simple the observation that it was a copyright symbol. That's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
it's
here's a good one. Yeah, you just mentioned Australian government. How many people do you think are actually aware of what the name of government is in the Constitution?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would think it's probably about 1% of the population probably know that it's actually the Commonwealth of... Is it the Commonwealth of Australia? Is that what it's supposed to be?
I think Scott might say that virtually nobody knows. This is the whole thing. This is why it's got through. It's not challenged.
Yeah. Well, the official name that you see in the Constitution of 1900 is the Government of the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
The Government of the Commonwealth, that's right, yep.
Yeah. So when you get stuff in the mail that's got the letterhead on the top that says Australian Government, your first question should be, why is that name not appearing in the Constitution? And some of the explanations we're starting to get back are along the lines of, oh, well, if you put it in the context of the discussion, the Australian government is right. And I'm like, hang on a minute. The context is the Constitution. Mm-hmm. You can't explain your way out of that one.
That's true.
If you're talking about a Swedish backpacker and an Australian backpacker talking about their respective governments, the Swedish guy's going to be talking about the Swedish government, the Australian's going to be talking about the Australian government. Doesn't mean that it's in the Constitution and it's the official name of what it should be referred to as legally and lawfully.
Yeah. And that's a good point you bring up, because if half of this this mirror government is actually registered to an American corporation, then you're talking about they're the Swedish backpacker now, and why are we paying them? That's
another little-known fact that Scott brought to light in the film, is that, and people don't realise this, when I tell them it, they're blown away, or they're just gobsmacked, but the Commonwealth of Australia is registered as with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, in Washington DC. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah. And it's funny. You were starting to see pseudo-official explanations of this, and there's certain guys who are actually out there trying to spin sort of how this is all legitimate, and their explanation is, it's for trading bonds, government bonds.
Yeah, that's what people have said to me too. Oh, it's just because of trade that they do that. And I'm not. I read on the SEC website that governments and nations don't need to be registered in order to do that.
I wouldn't think so. You need two consenting people.
Exactly. That's amazing.
I can't trade with you. You're not registered.
Yeah.
Right? You couldn't possibly be the Australian government or the Commonwealth of Australia. You're not registered, so no, you're obviously not them.
Well, the argument you've got is if it's a corporation, you don't have to deal with it. It's a choice factor. It's like anything, like a St George Bank. If I don't want to go to that bank, I'd choose another bank. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no compulsion
when
when dealing with a company without a contract.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we've been doing, is saying, okay, demonstrate to me that you're really government.
Yeah.
In the absence of that, show me a contract that we've got between the two of us.
Yeah. If you're not the government, then you're a corporation, and then you can make terms and conditions. Exactly what you said in the video. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's true.
And this all goes back to common. Is it common law, or that this sort of traces back to, Scott?
Well, the way it's identified out now is, the distinction I made in that documentary was really, we're all told that they're the Commonwealth of Australia per the Constitution. Mm-hmm. They're all claiming to do that. We're all taught that at school. We've got the Governor-General and we've got the separation of powers. And that's not actually what's happening. And so the distinction I made was, we've got these two parties. One's claiming to be what we're taught at school, and they're not. Now, there's a whole can of worms even into what that original constitution represents, in as much as, just the short version, you've got the Queen as the sovereign. Now, we all associate the sovereign as the free one, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got the Queen who's the free one, what are the subjects?
Exactly. Well, so what are we then? Yeah.
We're definitely not free if you've got the Queen as the free one.
So
we're enslaved.
Yeah, that's right. We're enslaved. So we are the ones who are supposed to be the sovereigns. Every human on Earth is supposed to be a sovereign.
Correct. And we've been talked out of that to look towards a queen or a king or someone to lead us. And we've given away that, we've stepped off our own throne.
Very interesting. So this corporation in America, who is it exactly?
Well, that's shrouded in a whole heap of darkness.
Oh, dear. Another worm.
Who that is.
Yeah.
We wrote to the SEC and they wrote back and said, it's publicly available on the SEC website. Like, well, could you actually point to that? Silence.
Oh, boy. Deafening silence.
Rather than explore who that company was, I treated that company as a symptom of them not being real government here in Australia. Mm-hmm. And so I explored the avenue of what did you need to be to satisfy what was brought on in 1900. What did you have to do to be regarded as real government? And it boiled down to one question. And that one question has been dodged and everyone's run away from it, even to the point where they're blatantly saying, I will not even answer that question. And that relates back to the office of the governor for each state, the office of the Governor-General,
yes,
Commonwealth level.
Mm-hmm. Because they renamed him, didn't they?
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of dodgy stuff. Current office is for the office of Governor-General. Mm-hmm. The original office was for the office of Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of the Commonwealth of Australia. So even just in the name, there's a difference. But the real kicker is that original office in 1900 was set up by Queen Victoria, constituted, using the words permanent provision for the office of Governor-General, etc. Mm-hmm. So permanent to me is permanent. It's not until I keel over and die. It's not until next Tuesday. It's permanent. And then further on in that document, she specified strict conditions for the revocation of the letters patent, which was the instrument that she used to constitute that office of Governor-General. Mm-hmm. So she spelled it out pretty clear as to what you had to do to revoke those letters. And what we've got is in 1984, for the Commonwealth level, we've got a document that purports to be a set of letters patent that allegedly revoked those original ones of 1900.
Yeah, I read this too, yeah. And they did it under the Great Seal of Australia, didn't they?
Yeah, so when the monarchs in the UK switched from using the Royal Seal, the Great Seal of the United Kingdom, to constituting their representatives in other countries using their seals rather than the Royal Seal, I mean, the irony of it is that that office is the Queen's representative. So if you're going to get royal assent, you'd expect to come somewhat kind of a royal stamp on it.
Yes.
And to me, the Australian coat of arms doesn't quite cut it as a royal seal.
No, it seems to have been hijacked.
So essentially, yeah, they've hijacked the Constitution. They've made changes to it under the wrong seal, basically, which makes it null and void. Is that right?
Well, what it looks like is you'll see a lot of these documents are reprinted, and even if you go to the website comlaw.gov.
.au/details/C2004Q00670.
It's actually on our site, Scott, on www.conspiracyhouse.com. If you scroll down on the right side, you'll find right at the bottom the Common Laws of Australia shortcut. So we encourage our listeners and that to go to that to check out what acts and bills have been changed for that week, because that's the best way to find out what's what they're trying to push through without people knowing.
Yeah, and I've been to that link that you talk about, Scott, and you can see it for yourself. It actually has the Great Seal of Australia on that document that's been scanned and uploaded.
Another
it's
interesting,
definitely not the Great Seal of the UK. Yeah,
has that got the signature of the Prime Minister at the time?
I think it does. Yeah.
Okay. If you can get that one in front of you, have a look at it and see how Bob Hawke has signed his name.
I'm just typing that in right now as we go.
An exercise in itself, which is quite hilarious, because we're talking a pretty important document where we've gone 84 years since 1900 to come along and supposedly change the office of Governor-General in the Commonwealth of Australia.
Yeah.
And this is a fairly monumental kind of document. And our beloved Prime Minister at the time signs it with his nickname.
Well, he's a Fabian. They do
actually the one I've got
things in.
The one of that link here I'm looking at, Mick and Scott, doesn't actually have a signature on it.
No, it's got his name, Bob Hawke.
Yeah.
Now, for all the legal documents I've seen, you put your full legal name there, including your name, or even at the very least an initial.
Yeah.
So Robert J. Hawke, I think, was their minimum respect.
So it's just garbage, isn't it? It's not.
Is to ask was that document revoked, or were the original documents in 1900 revoked in accordance with the power and authority reserved back in 1900?
Well, the answer is no.
But not one of them in the so-called government can actually answer. You'd think that they'd be able to point at these ones of 1984 and go, yes, they were done in accordance with reservation of power in 1900.
And here's the proof, and then they can't do it. You meet with silence, aren't you?
Exactly. And I mean, it's one simple question. It's fairly straightforward. It's, was it or wasn't it? And dodge. And even I think we got a response from the governor here in Western Australia when asked the same question. This was really quite hilarious. This one actually came in and said, right to acknowledge the notice from January 2013 seeks to establish the lawful validity of today's Office of the Governor of the state of Western Australia and its dependencies in the Commonwealth of Australia. This document has no legal or constitutional efficacy, and I did not intend to respond to it or to any other correspondence from you on the matter.
It blows you away, doesn't it? How can they get away with this? These are the people who are in power, running the place, and they just blatantly tell you that they're not going to answer you, or they don't reserve any right to have to answer you. Well, I'm sorry, they do.
but that's the problem. The silence is the answer, and that's why this is happening. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what it comes down to, isn't it,
Yeah.
Mick? Is that if they actually do tell you, they're either going to tell you the truth,
Yeah.
which will then break the whole system down,
Yeah.
or they're going to tell you a lie and they'll be quoted on the lie, so
Yeah.
they can't tell you. And their silence is obviously telling of that. And by them being silent, then you're allowed to get away with the things that you get away with, isn't that right, Scott? That's what people are doing nowadays. I read on the OPPT website, and we'll get into that in a moment. But someone I saw had in Melbourne, they were in court. The person who was defending themselves presented the judge with a courtesy notice and requested that they provide proof of who they are and who they represent, and they were told that they weren't going to do that. So the defendant, the person said, "Well, I don't have to be here," and left the courtroom, and legally did it apparently.
There's a huge, that's very powerful. It's taking that non-response and making it the answer.
Yeah.
And for years, a lot of people going, but they're not responding. They have to respond. They're public servants. Well, if you put it in the context of them being a corporation pretending to be government, they don't have to respond at all.
That's the biggest problem. They're actually answering by not answering, and that's why, as I said, that's why we're onto this, because it's the copyright symbol is a company, and if they're a company and a corporation, then that's how you treat them. And this makes everything on its head, including the Justice Department and the Police Department. This is quite serious. And they wouldn't even be aware of it from below the Commissioner down. It'd just be another job. But at the top, they are utterly aware of what they're doing, and that's the ones who are accountable.
Yeah.
That's why most of the departments will not answer, because they don't know how to answer it.
Correct. And the worst thing is, they're all in there to earn a living, to pay their mortgages, which is another complete fraud.
The best thing you said in that video, Scott, that I noticed was when people were asked, did they know about it? And if they did, it was best to be silent.
Yeah.
And you just answered it. Then when you said that, they got their mortgages. Even if they do know, they're not going to say anything.
Yeah.
And this is really scary, because it means that the system has been set up from the ground down, and it's got to this point where it's a bloated monster, and that's why we're copping all these taxes. The carbon tax goes offshore, the GST is illegitimate. This is really dangerous, because we are actually getting what's left of the taxpayers' money for recreation and all the money they've left for their holiday. It's all being eaten up by taxes that are going to a corporation somewhere else, and the taxes that are supposed to be here, used for the Australian people, being whittled away to a minority. And this is dangerous, because if they're that if they're that powerful, they're not going to want to give up that pot of gold that quick.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of evidence now of their tap having been turned off. Mm-hmm. And if we jump back to that idea of the government's set up over in Washington, D.C. for trading bonds, if we explore the idea of these bonds, what we're starting to see now is paperwork that blatantly describes humans as capital.
Yeah.
So there was an executive order from Clinton that surfaced recently that literally laid out within this presidential executive order humans as capital.
Yeah. Well, a corporation would deal with people as digits, as a part of a plan, rather than... See, the government of the world was set up by the people, but now they've been hijacked by corporations, and we've become the digits in a business plan.
Yeah.
That's basically it. And that's why we haven't got a say, because, as you know, if you work for a corporation and you don't play by the rules, you get shown the door. It's that simple.
Well, think of the direction of reporting in a corporation. The employees don't direct the directors. The directors do the directing down to the employees.
Yeah.
So if you look at that corporation in Washington, look at the direction the reporting is going in. It's currently Canberra reporting to Washington.
Yeah.
And you can go and see within even the filings in that SEC registry, there are specific directions coming from the SEC that says, please show this in the report. Please include a map to include where Australia is.
Yeah,
Like,
that's crazy.
if you were reporting...
It's unbelievable.
If this
I've seen some information out there that shows that even people, I think this is in the United States, but some of the states where their birth certificate is issued to a person, it's got bank details within the actual certificate itself.
Yeah, Canada had on the back of their birth certificates for a number of years for Treasury use only.
Yeah.
Now, look, the most dangerous thing about this whole situation is it doesn't matter who is elected in Australia. People need to understand that it doesn't matter what party is elected. It's the same system behind it.
Yep.
And this is the scariest thing of all. They don't care who's running the country because someone else is running the country. They're just there as a puppet government, and it doesn't matter if it's Liberal, Labor. It doesn't matter. That's all irrelevant. It's like a football match, and this is really dangerous because this system is probably set up, and it looks like it probably is worldwide.
Yeah. Well, what we're seeing now is we just came across some documents recently that links all of the 4 big banks here in Australia through to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And they've registered the collateral as basically everything that bank owns or will own in the future. And they have a security interest in that collateral. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that includes is chattel paper, which if you break that one down through their codes, the Uniform Commercial Code, the definition goes down to goods, which also includes the unborn young of animals.
Wow. Whoa.
Now, how many farmers do you know that go and count their pregnant cattle and go back to their accountant and say, look, I've got 5 pregnant cattle, we'd better put those down on the books as goods?
Yeah, obviously no one, yeah.
So what's it in there for? And
I understand what he's saying. Yeah, I know
what we're starting to see is that's part of the paperwork that's linking the humans into the
same thing. Yep. Boy, oh boy.
It just goes to show that they see us as cattle, don't they?
Well, it's the old system. It's the old system they used to have of serfdom. It's exactly the same system again. They've just reintroduced it, renamed it, and
repackaged. Yeah,
and that's it. It's just in a modern context, but it's the same thing. There are rulers that are unaccountable, answer to no one, and then there are the serfs. And unfortunately, because of a lot of the businesses around the world collapsing under the weight of the Chinese mega manufacturers, we're all getting dragged to a third world level. And it seems to be deliberate. And if you think about it, that is what serfdom is. There's no middle management. There's no middle class. It's just the bottom and the top. There's no middle. You see, they're going to crush the middle so that you can't get to the top. Mm-hmm. And this seems to be why they've set up these systems that you can't infiltrate, because they've slowly but surely whittle away the middle class until it's gone. And this is what's happening. And I don't want the rest of the world to have the blueprint of how China is set up, because that's a very dangerous thing to have for the rest of the world. And, and the other thing, Scott, just quickly, we do know that China is set up with a masquerading corporation at the top, with the serfdom underneath. And the people think it's a communist thing where they're equal at the top, but it's exactly that blueprint. That's what I'm trying to say, and I actually think it's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, it seems that same thing's been used worldwide.
Yeah.
With different badges on it, different names, and same sort of hierarchy.
Shiny stars, yeah.
Yeah, look at my shiny badge.
I love it. That's great.
I love that part.
That's really good. I think that interjection of humour with the animation is, you've got to do this like this. If we go in with a sledgehammer,
people put up a shield against it.
Yeah, they will, because this is hardcore information. This is actually more, to me, it puts all the jigsaw pieces together, because this is the machine. Lee and Scott, that actually runs this. We go on about the New World Order, Scott, because it really isn't a New World Order. It's actually something that's been done before in the past, but now they're doing it better, and it's on a global scale. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it even more dangerous, because you can't challenge how are you going to find a global elite that run when they're everywhere? You know what I mean? Like, they're not in Germany, or they're not in China. They're global. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they don't. That's right. They actually don't see the world as nations. They just see the world as a whole, and they run certain sections of the world, don't they? This is what they see it as.
Well, they'll see it as one huge corporation. This is the whole thing, and it's dangerous because you lose your sovereignty. All money will become one money, and it won't be money. It'll just be digit. And if they want to turn your digits off, they just unplug you, and then suddenly you're broke. You got nothing. I mean, this is dangerous. This is a form of control, and yes, we are the cattle.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry,
go on.
You go. I was just going to segue into something else. You go first.
I was going to say, when it comes to that value aspect, is for years and years and years we've been conditioned to believe that the value is external to ourselves. So we're all running after paper and chasing money.
And the car on the ad, on the $40,000 car that appears every 5 minutes on an ad. Yeah.
Yep. Or we're chasing even gold.
Yep.
And we think gold actually has value in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when you go back to the example of when we had the treasuries that used to bring money into existence that would spend it on the infrastructure projects like roads and bridges, the money that they printed wasn't valuable at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was simply a representation of the energy expended by those who built the bridges and the roads.
That's correct.
So the real value originally or ultimately resides within those humans who expend the effort.
That's right.
Yep. That's
So
right.
whilst ever we position the value as being external to ourselves, whether it be in a piece of paper, a car, or a house, or a shiny piece of gold, we're treating the value as external to ourselves.
That's correct.
Now, the irony of this is when you go along to the bank and you want to borrow money, you're perpetuating that idea because they're saying they've got the value and not you. All the bank's done is taken your application form as a promise to pay, deemed that as a form of money and turned it into a different species, and then paid the vendor of say for a mortgage,
Yep.
and then go away and create a fraudulent loan contract that you spend the next 25 years paying back plus interest.
Yeah, that's correct. See, I always said the communities of the world, when they started, used to trade. Someone who was a carpenter would trade his skill for someone who was with another skill, and they would trade. And there was no middle money. There was no exchange. It was an exchange of what you just said, what the actual person could perform. That was the value. That's what you traded. Now they've put the value onto a fiat money system, and it's exploded, and they're using that to actually draw all the resources in. That's what they're doing. They're buying up all the resources, and the mining is all going towards a fiat system, and we're getting drawn into it through debt.
Well, if you look at it in a real fundamental sense, they're essentially harvesting your human energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening when your mother pledges your future energy and value at the registration of birth.
With a birth certificate. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
She's signing that away, and they're going, thank you very much.
Yes. I read that, and I thought that was extremely interesting because I had to renew a birth certificate to get to Hawaii, and I thought, this is an incredibly bureaucratic process, and I don't understand it. And it's like people in government have jobs just to keep them in a job. Like you went through it, Scott, with the customs thing. It's ridiculous. You're dealing with a very obvious question, and you don't get the obvious answer because it needs to go through the process so that all these people get paid to get you the answer, which is unbelievable.
It goes through layers of bureaucracy is what it goes through. Yeah.
So when you think about it, government is shrouded because it's so bureaucratic, and that's why no one questions it, because there's no straight answer to anything. And they just refer you back to the Constitution or the laws, which are now, we realise, are set up by the legitimate government. Now we have a mirrored government that just uses those laws to suit a corporation.
We have a corporation masquerading as government.
That's
Well, the good thing I'm seeing is that basically all of us have been in the same boat. Right? Even those who are working in a customs, they've been treated as slaves as well. So in that sense, they're getting screwed over royally just like us. They're just playing a different role in this whole game.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying before. Like most people, I was explaining to friends that most people that are almost at the top have no idea because they're all part of a system from the ground up, but right at the top they completely understand their business plan and they're not accountable. And that's why this is all set up. It's all set up to look like it's government, and if it was, and the money was coming back into this country like it should, or coming to all the institutions it's supposed to be sent to, that would be good, but no one can check them. There's no one to do the checking. There's no accountability. People just go, that's the government. It has been since it's been. So there's no accountability. This is ridiculous. If they can't answer questions, they're not accountable. And that means that's not government, because government was put there by the people. That is what government. That's what government is. It's not a feudal system where it's a king and queen.
No.
You know, we're an independent country, and the government shall answer to the people. It has to.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating frustrating thing for a lot of folk is when they go and ask these questions of the purported government, and they don't get an answer. They're really sort of you can see steam coming out their ear because they're going, "But you're a public servant," and that unfortunately is just an expectation that they are, and they're actually not. They're a corporation pretending to me. They have no obligation to you as a person out in the general public.
Yeah.
Their obligation is to their shareholders.
See, it's interesting you bring up the point where you, when in the video where you actually challenged customs and then they waived it. That's a really, really interesting thing. When I saw that, that's where they're admitting that they're wrong. I mean, the fact that
they just want you to go away. Let's not talk about this anymore. Yep. You go away. We'll give you what you want. Now stop talking about it. Shh.
Yeah. See, now if everybody did that, this would be in our face. I tell you what.
It would be a meltdown, wouldn't it? It would just be a meltdown.
Because, as I said, people just trust the status quo. They just do, because they're too busy getting on with their lives. They don't want to challenge these things, but they don't realise that all our free money is going to tax now. One by one, they introduce more and more and more taxes, and you know why? Because they're not legitimate.
Yeah. That recent episode in Cyprus and recently as well in Australia, where they reduced the number of years that your bank account can sit idle.
We talked about that last week's show.
Yeah, I'm seeing those things as signs of desperation that their money pot, or you could call it the honey pot, has dried up.
Yeah, well, the cracks will appear, and they're going to expose more of these things, and people are going to start realising as their money starts to dwindle in their bank accounts, if they have any in there after they've taken it, that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the whole system, how it's set up, and we need to look at the legal side of it without going into their justice system and use the Constitution to fight them with what they say is their law. We have to fight them with the real laws and say, prove it.
So this is where I wanted to touch on, Scott, is your use of the courtesy notice and your understanding of UCC, which is Uniform Commercial Code. And I actually sat down in a little meeting with a friend of mine and a lawyer who's a friend of his, and I gave him some of this information prior to the meeting, and I said, take a look at this. I gave him a copy of a courtesy notice, and he thought it was very interesting, by the way. He thought, now, this is a very interesting tool. I think this could actually really work, and it looked quite legitimate to him. And I think the big question that people have about this, and I struggle to deal with it too, because I'm trying to get my head around it, but it's because it's so paradigm shifting. How can it be that just by handing someone one of these notices that you can get what you want from government? Talk about this courtesy notice, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Well, I think for a large percentage of the population, what they want from government is to be left alone. Okay, so the origins of this courtesy notice came from the documentary that I put together was seen by one of the trustees who
This is the One People's Public Trust, is it?
Correct, yeah. So back last year, they'd conducted their own investigations at very high levels within the banking circles. They were one of them was a lawyer within the realms of what you'd call the system, working with high-level bankers, Rothschilds and that sort of thing. And now the first thing people come to mind is, oh, hang on, she worked with Rothschild, must be a scam. Like, well, no, I used to work for one of the Rothschilds as well. I drove his boat.
Well,
yeah, that doesn't make me one of them.
Yeah, doesn't make you a party to it, no.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the context of people get these things and join A to B when A shouldn't join with B. So anyway, the investigations that were done at these levels were seeing what was going on in the banking system. I think she put her own mortgage on the line to see what would happen. Ran it through the court system as a lawyer, revoked or actually cancelled her bar association membership. I've seen the document where she wrote in and said, look, you can get me off the system. I've made my choice not to perpetuate this system anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, basically what happens is with all of these corporate governments, they all funneled back up through to the Bank of International Settlements. Same with all of these banks. They channel through to central banks, and of course the central banks are all members of the Bank of International Settlements. Mm-hmm. So it was all funneling back up to this principal organisation, and they put to the Bank of International Settlements a series of allegations, essentially, that please demonstrate you're not conducting this slavery system. You're not treating humans as capital, that there is a remedy in the system, and which we found in Australia, there just is no remedy in the court system, which if you've got no remedy, you're in slavery. And so all of this was put to the principals and given the opportunity to rebut it, and of course they didn't. They sat silent.
Yeah, this rebuttal is part of the whole. Is this part of the whole UCC, to and fro, that they have to have a chance to rebut, and if they don't rebut, then it's silence is consent?
Exactly. So they used the Uniform Commercial Code to be the mechanism and the system that they worked in registering each one of these documents, putting them to the Bank of International Settlements. Now, there's some people who say, UCC is the lowest form of law, and it doesn't apply in Australia, for example. Now, those documents that I talked about earlier on that linked the big four banks of Australia through to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, first question is, with such important transactions, would you use the highest form of law or the lowest form of law to register those sort of arrangements? And my response would be that you'd use the highest form of law available when you're dealing at that sort of level.
Yeah.
Plus that linked Australian banks directly into that system. We've since had communication with some of the auditors and folk in some of the big banks of Australia, and they've tried to explain away how this arrangement with the Federal Reserve Bank was just to do a borrow of money during the GFC, which is ironic because the GFC was in 2008 and that document dates from 2001. But anyway, we thank them for confirming that a UCC is alive and kicking in Australia.
There you go. Okay, so there's proof right there for people listening.
Yeah,
exactly. And already we've got this thing called the Personal Property Security Register in Australia, which is just Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, rebadged under the Personal Property Securities Act of 2009. Mm-hmm. So most of the lawyers around town are unfamiliar with UCC.
Yeah, well, the guy I spoke to, he had no idea, hadn't heard of it.
So
example right there, yeah.
Doesn't come up with local council transactions. It doesn't come up with property sales. It doesn't come up with transactions at big corporate levels in states. Even Commonwealth level, it's very rare, and yet here we are seeing it used in the biggest banks, linking it back to the Federal Reserve. So there's the number of people who would be exposed to that form of law is very, very small.
Scott, are you aware of the Brigalow Corporation in Queensland? What's happened there with the state government there?
To a certain degree.
Yeah, because that's the same thing. That's where the former Minister Peter Beattie actually changed the law of the state government in Queensland over to a private corporation called the Brigalow Corporation. And that's a very interesting thing because that actually gives you an idea of what you're talking about on a federal level. This is on a state level, and it just shows that, like what you said with Bob Hawke, and now you've got Peter Beattie, they can actually just sign away what was traditionally Australian law into a corporation setup. And that means, and this is a big thing because the Sue Main was speaking about this, Sue Mains, back in November in 2010. So all this stuff is sort of recent. They're actually, like you said, things are getting desperate now and they're changing over and grabbing the pot of gold quicker. And that's why this stuff's coming to the surface. And thank God for the internet because...
thank God for guys like Scott and this organisation OPPT with Heather and Tucci Giraffe, I believe it is, who have found, they've found, the way to get past it all. They've found, what do you call it? the cracks inside the big block of stone known as the banking and corporation world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even outside of what OPPT had done, there are a number of folk around the world who've been challenging the banks to determine or prove the validity of an actual loan, to prove where the actual funds came from that were supposedly loaned to you.
That's a very interesting point you make, because I know people that are in my circle of friends that have gone bankrupt and challenged the banks for the actual debt you're talking about, and have actually had the debts waived.
Yep, there you go.
And it's an amazing thing. And you tell people this, just people that don't know about it. No. If you default, you've got to pay. I said, no. In actual fact, you don't have to pay. And they go, no, that's not possible. And I say, no, it's possible. I've got proven cases of this, and it's amazing. If you challenge what is supposed to be legitimate law, you find out different things going on.
Exactly.
We need people to document all of these sort of cases, so that people can look at it by case by case and see how it applies to them. Because I tell you what, my goodness, I am so tempted to write a letter to the bank and hand them a courtesy notice.
Well, I think what Scott's doing
if you do, send one of those UCC financing statements that shows us humans as part of their collateral. And I've got a nice little diagram that goes with it that shows the reference back to the birth certificates.
That's very powerful.
These documents, I believe, are ones that we weren't supposed to come across. Yeah. And yet they are publicly available. You can go to the Washington, D.C. UCC registry, search these transactions and see them. Wow. And they're all there.
So in layman's terms, what does that mean exactly? Like, say, let's do a practical example.
Okay.
Say for example, I've got a letter from my bank telling me you haven't paid your mortgage. We're gonna foreclose on your property. Pay now. So take us through sort of things step by step and how that would work and how do you get out of this?
Okay, so using this courtesy notice, what we're doing is we're pointing at the fact that the banks were all foreclosed back in December last year.
Just quickly, that in itself is a massive statement that people need to. And I had trouble getting my head around that until I did a bit more reading. But you are correct in saying that all banks and corporations were foreclosed as of December 25th, 2012. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. The best document to read for the background on that, it's 12 pages. Mm-hmm. It's called the Declaration of Facts, and it's available on there's a website called opt-in.com. That's OPPT-in.
Yeah, I'm on it now.
And that 12-page Declaration of Facts lays out everything that was done to put these allegations to the slavery system, the principles, and say, here you go, rebut that. And they didn't. And basically what ensued was the foreclosure of those banks.
Yeah.
And that's legally done under law. So they unrebutted, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
That means then they haven't been able to prove or come back with whatever to challenge it. So they were then foreclosed under those terms and conditions. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're seeing is there's a lot of people who are sending these courtesy notices, which essentially points out the fact that those banks and governments were foreclosed.
Okay.
And it says, look, in the absence of you having now a corporate safety net around you because your corporation's foreclosed, you're acting as a private individual.
Uh-huh.
So unless you've got a contract one-to-one, individual to individual, that would compel performance on my behalf, then you've got nothing to compel me to do anything, like pay a mortgage or pay a parking fine or pay tax or anything like that. You've got nothing to compel performance. So in that sense, there's no contracts between us. I'm going to offer my own terms and conditions that will govern the relationship from this point forwards. And some of those terms include things like should you choose to pursue a claim against me without a lawfully binding contract.
Wow, that just makes it null and void from there.
So it does. When you send this courtesy notice to the bank, you're suggesting send the UCC financing statement along with it, but maybe have a look at the Declaration of Facts beforehand to get your head around it. But when you send this in, you saying hand it to someone physically or address it to someone by name, or do you attention it to the corporation? How do you do that part?
No, well, if you address it to the corporation, you kind of contradict yourself.
Right, so you can't recognise them as a corporation.
That's correct.
Right.
So you would be looking for an individual, and here's the irony of this is, look at all these banks and governments, and lawyers are particularly bad at this, are ducking and dodging and hiding behind their corporate office and their corporate name. Lawyers are brilliant at it. They'll sign a letter that says XYZ lawyers. You're like, well, come on, put your name down there and stand out there and stand behind what you're saying. And they're ducking and dodging. So what's happening is folk are sending these courtesy notices in, and I'd strongly suggest reading that declaration of facts as a bare minimum, because there's a lot of understanding that comes behind this. Some people are seeing this as a silver bullet, and they're going out and sending courtesy notices. And when they get a letter back that comes from the bank or the government that says, oh, that's baseless and we're not going to respond and we're not going to do this.
I've seen examples of that, yeah.
They're crumbling and they're going, oh, but it's not working. And in reality, what you've just received is the acceptance of your terms and conditions.
Yes.
They've just written to you and said, oh, I'm going to pursue this course of action in accordance with that term.
Yes. Exactly. That's great. Excellent.
And this holds up in court, in a court. Would the court, you saying that the court is foreclosed as well, even though that they're no longer relevant, or because if they say you have to go to court or someone drag,
gone. Forget about courts.
Yeah, it's under the same system. Same, right. Illegitimate government.
Read that declaration of facts. You won't find a little exemption for the courts that says, oh, we've foreclosed on all of these corporate entities and these illegitimate governments, except for the courts, because we think they're nice. No. The epicenter of a lot of this fraud and corruption. There was an audio session just recorded recently. Military personnel in Canada described how these court cases are basically run in the background beforehand. You're judged guilty before the fact, and the charade is they get you in there to run through the motions.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
So by physically stepping into one of them, you're then
guilty,
accepting the terms of them being a corporation and so forth. Is that right? Like, so are you saying you can't physically step into a courtroom?
You do.
Or you shouldn't?
Do so with implementing that system. You're giving it energy and stepping back in there and saying, I accept you as a judge. You call the guy Your Honour, and you've just accepted him as a judge and capable of judging you.
Yeah, so you've got to use the Constitution and the law as it was to fight them with who their bosses are, because they're not breaking the law in a sense. It's just that their bosses are on top of them dictating. This is the problem, because if it doesn't agree with them, they will change it to suit them, which is why he was saying about the laws changing in the video and that, because that's what they'll do. They'll amend everything to get, if there's any cracks in the system that they've set up, they'll amend it to get it to that point. The judges and the lawyers and all that are working under that system, but they do know the original law. And so you can fight that system within the system, but the problem is when it gets to the crunch, as Scott said, they've already made their determination. This is the problem. So,
my experience has been avoid going into their environment.
Yeah.
They know all the tricks in the trade to be able to weasel their way out of things.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're going to get a directive anyway from the top eventually if it doesn't go their way, because they're not going to expose this system at all costs. This is the problem. So we need to get this message out to as many people as possible, because that is the power. It's not within the illegitimate governments trying to force a law on us that they can bend whenever they want. It's actually common sense and the law of the land with the people to understand that the way it's been set up is wrong, and we need to challenge that, and then we'll come back to the corruption, you see.
So, Scott, are there people, professionals in law around the world who have taken a look at this? People outside of these organisations like Opt-in and what you're doing that have taken a look at this and gone, "What the hell? Like, this is legitimate. They've done this by the book. We're screwed." Like, are there people who are saying this and coming on board saying this is legitimate, 100%? It's provable. You know what I mean? Like.
There's a number of folk that are starting to take notice and go, oh, yep, this has got legs.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest part I found in coming to terms with this, Scott. Look, I 100% am all for it and believe it now. That I've read more into it and heard people talk about it. But that was the hardest part for me in getting over the line with me specifically. And I imagine it's probably going to be the same with a lot of other people. They're not going to believe this. They're going to go, "This, it's crap. Like, how can that be?" And I'm like, "Well, you need to read it. You need to understand that it is legitimate." Yeah.
Think of the number of people who would actually look for a judgment from a court to validate it. They'll go, "Oh, I haven't seen a court judgment that proves that's legitimate yet, so it can't be."
Yeah.
And their thinking is blocked from the presumption that that court was legitimate in the first place.
Yeah.
And even from the work I've done in Australia, I can't find a court that I can take customs to deal with that issue with my Corvette.
That's
there
crazy.
Is not a legitimate court in the country.
Yeah.
And yet we've got folk who still believe, no judgment here, just their conditioning has been that courts are courts.
Well, what you said earlier in the video, later in the video, sorry, where they sent you a letter that was fear-based, and it was a mild threat. Now that's what happens. Banks do the same thing if you owe money, and you haven't, and they're giving you the reminders. It's the same system. They'll send you a fear letter that says, if you do not pay this, we will refer this to the courts. That's enough to get people to pay.
A lot of times, yes.
And I've been told by lawyers the same thing in cases that I've dealt with friends that I know, exactly the same thing, where they say it gets to a point where people just go, I don't want to take this any further, and they settle. And that's what a lot of lawyers push for that. They don't want a lot of the laws challenged. They just want it settled. That's actually their goal. The goal is not to actually sort of win and change a law. Their goal is to get it settled and keep the status quo.
Yeah.
That's what I've noticed.
And the funny thing is with this courtesy notice is when you offer these terms and conditions to the likes of banks or governments, when they write you one of those fear-based letters, you can approach it now and say, "Oh, wow, thank you. They've just accepted my terms and conditions."
Exactly. Yes.
now that takes a little bit of a time to adjust to, because we're used to reading the letters and going, "Oh, but they said they might do this."
Yeah, you mentioned that in your film too, didn't you? When you got that letter and you thought, "Oh, it's all over," and then you went, "Hang on a minute, thank you." Yeah.
Well, that's it. It's when you see it like that, you can actually go out to your letterbox with a bit of a smile on your face, going, "Oh, didn't get anything today. Damn, no customers."
Well, I take my hat off to you, Scott, because exposing it just from a simple air conditioner, that's utterly amazing. And to get inside the bureaucracy and open that can of worms, it's been an absolute pleasure to find out how we can know about all this. But what can we actually do if we get the message out and we've got a horde of people that are all saying, let's do something about it? What can we actually do as a directive? What can we do?
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, exactly, because this is something that we really, really need to think about, because
it's very exciting.
Okay,
it's going to snowball.
I would say that you've got in Australia two groups of people: those who believe that we've still got real government, and then there's those who go, no, we've got this corporate mess. Yeah. So you could break it down to those two broad things. For the first group that are still thinking that, okay, we've got a government, they're just corrupt. What can we do? The first thing I would suggest is there's one question that we can ask for them about the governors. Now, on my website, I've got diagrams that can be used to put to any form of government, whether it be a court, police, the ATO, the local government. And if you look at each one of those diagrams, they all follow the same structure, going back to the office of the governor.
All right. Are you talking about the two logos on the front page of the website?
No. These are some diagram pages. So I think it's validate federal government or validate state government.
Yep.
And within there's a subset of diagrams for each type of department or police or whatever.
Excellent.
Is that under resources or under... I'm on your website now, folks. For people out there, it's truth-now.net. So which page are you referring to here, so I can have a look?
From the menu, you'll find local government, or state government, or federal government.
Yep.
So each one of those is a sub-menu for a diagram.
Okay, here we go. Yep.
Yeah, I'm looking
validity of local government. Gotcha.
Federal police. Yeah, I'm looking at that. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll see they all trace back to the office of the governor. Now, if you ask that one question. Were the letters patent from 1900 revoked, altered, or amended? And I'm going to tweak these up so that they've actually got the the full wording, in accordance with the full power and authority reserved by Queen Victoria in 1900. That's the one question to ask. And if you ask that one to your governor, and you do that through a 3-step process and get the fact that there is no, those were never revoked, then you've got an office of governor that was constituted in 1900 that still exists to this day.
Yeah.
If they're operating from another office, if you drew that on a timeline, that would be a parallel office that originated back in the 80s.
1984, wasn't it?
So anything that came from a parallel office can only constitute imposters.
Yeah.
So straight off, you've built that bridge across that we're dealing with a corporate government.
Yeah. Which is what you're all talking about. It's exactly what you're saying, is that we're not dealing with the government anymore. We actually should treat it as if we're dealing with a corporation from this point.
Yep. So from that point there, you've crossed that bridge to the point where, okay, now we're dealing with this corporate government. So that caters to those folk who believe we've still got a legitimate government, they're just corrupt. Now, if we come from the point where we're dealing with a corporate government, the foreclosure of that corporate entity is a whole lot easier. It's a lot more palatable to actually go, yeah, well, that kind of makes sense. They've been operating a former slavery system.
Yeah.
That's where, when you go through that 12-page declaration of facts with OPPT, read through that, and if you can, read it aloud and just feel the energy of it. It's genuinely powerful.
Yeah.
And they don't mince words. There's a lot of legalese in there it's written for the audience of the lawyers.
I noticed that, yeah.
You'd imagine that they've had their best on that, trying to crack it.
Yeah.
To just turn around and say it's baseless doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
To rebut that, you've got to do it in full specificity and particularity on your own individual liability, and sign it with your wedding signature.
Yeah. I'm actually on the part where it says, what can you do? And you want to walk us through that, Scott? Because that's pretty good. That gives people a really good way to fight them.
So let's see. I said, well, let's. You can email public servants entry here in Australia, and even worldwide. It's getting a bit of traction in Canada and the States and the UK. I did have a petition up there for the Queen. I'm actually going to pull that because pretty much that's time for petitioning these folk in the slavery system is over.
I was actually going to suggest to you that, because the Queen's system is actually part of that system, and you probably wouldn't even get a response from that at all, actually. But it is good to let them know, in a sense.
By the way, did you know, on that note, there's a new document that's just gone up for the OPPT that we wrote called the Foreclosure Flyer. And if people are thinking of... you could send it to your neighbour, actually. It's not saying that your neighbour's foreclosed. It's a flyer that just advises of what was done.
Yes.
It says, look, hey, if you guys have heard of the courtesy notice, you could actually use this if you've got a so-called mortgage. And you could easily send that foreclosure flyer to anyone in so-called government as well, or banks, and let them know that they actually might get a courtesy notice with their name on it.
That's interesting, isn't it?
I'm actually gonna send one of those to my lawyer contact and see if he can have a read through it, and I think I might actually send one to the bank, followed by a courtesy notice later on.
This is interesting. Yeah,
it's very interesting.
We need to get the ball rolling, because this is a divided thing. We need to be united in this, because a united thing will get an answer. It may not be the answer we want, but we're going to get an answer. That's all we want here, is an answer. We just want them to say something about this question. That's what Scott's website's all about. It just wants the truth, and we just want to know the truth. And I think that this is everyone needs to know about this, even if they're not don't understand what it's about. They just need to have it in front of them, so that when everyone is united against this silence,
this tyrannical system.
Well, it's a silence thing at the moment, but we understand. We can see how it's set up. We just need everyone to be aware of it, so that they can then join, because unfortunately a lot of people, like Scott was saying earlier, they don't want to get involved because they don't understand it, and they don't want to rock the boat, even if it is true. You see, this is the problem, and this is what happens with all tyrannical governments and wars, and that's how they start, because people they become subservient to it. They just go, oh, look, I understand it's bad, but what can I do about it?
Yeah. Well, if you took all the people who said, "What can I do about it?" who actually sent one letter in, that'd be a truckload of letters.
Well, I reckon the reason we need to do this is we need to get an answer. Because once the answer's exposed, that's it. Then we can move forward to the next part, and try
That's
and
right.
find...
Yeah. Will the world accept them telling us the actual dead-on truth that we're under a slavery system? Would the world accept that? Let's hope that they wouldn't.
People will want to put a name to the face. It's very simple. A lot of this, as Scott said, is shrouded. That's why it's hard to get to the top and find out what's going on. When the average person realises there's a face and a name, believe me, that's going to end it. It's at the moment it's surrounded under corporation law and length of time, because this is another problem.
I'm going to be writing an article about all this, and I'll probably get you to give me some quotes later on too, Scott, and I'll put it on my website and send you a link to it.
Sure. Well, what we're doing here with these documents is we're essentially presenting a choice to these public servants and banks. We're literally saying, what's your choice? Do you choose to continue to perpetuate this slavery system, or you choose not to? And we've all got choices, and our choices come with consequences.
And I tell you, with the economies of the world dominoing down, this is going to become a definite talking issue with a lot of people, because they're facing lots of problems with debt. We're getting more taxes. We've got green taxes coming in. None of this stuff's going to go away. It's going to get worse. And as Scott said, their pot of gold is running out. They want more. They're going to increase these taxes. We're going to have more things. There's going to be more foreclosures. We are going to have a financial crisis. That is definitely coming. We are going to head into a depression, and they probably will try and start up a couple of mini wars just to get us refocused away from what's happening on here. We need to move on this now.
Well, that's why we're seeing the North Korea thing, Mick. It's just a distraction.
Yeah, but I'm saying we need to move on this now. We can't just sit on our hands. This is a serious thing, and people need to know that there is hope.
Yeah. I see a very positive outcome from a lot of this.
Yeah.
And it does take a little bit of research. And looking at some of the resources. I mean, there are radio shows on this One People's Public Trust each week on Blog Talk Radio.
Yep. Do you want to get all the websites out, Scott? Just get them all out now, mate. All of them.
Yeah. Blog Talk Radio, look for opt-in.
Yep.
Look for removingtheshackles.net. There's American Kabuki, I think, at blogspot.com.
Yep.
There's also Koala Pelli blog. I think I'll need to Skype that one.
Yeah. Okay, mate. No worries.
And then Lisa Harrison is another one who's running some of these radio shows in Australia.
Yes.
So there's plenty of resources out there, and plus that opt-in.com.
Yes. Do you want to plug your one too, Scott?
Yeah, mine's Truth-Now.
Yep.
That's probably a good one for those who are struggling with the idea that we've got a corporate government. I've
shown your website to a few people, Scott, and just that opening homepage with the diagram of the two seals, and then when they watch the 2-minute clip for your documentary, it actually blows them away, and it gets them hook, line, and sinker. I think I've convinced a few people to watch that lately.
It's a brilliant website, Scott.
I've watched that 4 times now. That documentary, I can't get it enough.
Sweet. You'll be out there going, look at my badge.
Yeah, I have a shiny star. Oh, it's brilliant. All right, guys, we've got to wrap it up. That was great, Scott. That was this is a really big issue, people. This is probably one of the most important issues out there at the moment.
I think it's the most. This is a turning point, Mick. This is what this is. Yep.
Yeah, because this is affecting money in people's pockets as well, and that's what most people are most worried about at the moment. And if they understand that the system that's been set up is not legitimate, and we can actually challenge it, and we can challenge it en masse, this is really going to shake up the top, because they're not going to have time to reorganise all this. This is just going to expose it, and we need to do that.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we need to do it. We need to.
Would you be happy to come back on another time as well, Scott, if needed?
Sure. Yeah, no dramas.
Oh, that's great.
Wonderful.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. This is it's been pretty full on. We've gone over the hour mark, which is great. That's great to have you, Scott.
No worries.
Same for you too, General. That was good.
Yep, I'll have another article out soon, a nice big one about this on realnewsaustralia.com.
That's it. And that was General Lee Maddox and Scott Bartle. And that's Conspiracy Oz. Contact us on +61 028 006 1918. Go to the website www.conspiracyoz.com. Download the podcast from iTunes and get with the program. Well, guys,
We are free. We're free people now.
well, the sun is shining now, so let's keep it
Oh,
shining.
yes.
And that's been really informative. Okay, we'll keep up to date with you, Scott. And let us know how it's going, and we'll get people to go to your website and fight the cause. Those 4 steps, people. Follow
Brilliant.
those 4 steps, because there is always hope. Always hope.
Definitely.
Beyond the pot of gold is the rainbow, and that's where we're heading. All right, guys, that's Conspiracy Oz, 7th of April 2013. Over
Much love. Much love.
and out.